Welcome as we read about McCulloch v. Maryland. And in this court case, the Supreme Court validates or approves of implied powers. This is a Supreme Court decision, March 6, 1819. McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819. McCulloch v. Maryland defined the scope of the U.S. Congress legislative powers and how it relates to the powers of the American state legislatures. So this part's very important. The dispute in McCulloch involved the legality of the national bank and a tax that the state of Maryland had put on the national bank. In its ruling, the Supreme Court established, firstly, that the necessary and proper clause of the United States Constitution does give the United States federal government certain implied powers that are not explicitly enumerated or written in the U.S. Constitution. And secondly, that the American federal government is absolutely supreme over the states. And so, states' ability to interfere with the federal government is quite limited. The state of Maryland had attempted to impede or mess with an operation by the Second Bank of the United States through a tax on all notes of banks not chartered, not created, in Maryland. Though the law, by its language, was generally applicable to all banks not chartered in Maryland, the Second Bank of the United States was the only out-of-state bank then existing in Maryland, and the law was thus recognized in the court's opinion as having been specifically targeting the Bank of the United States. The court cited, or quoted, the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, which allows the federal government to pass laws not expressly provided for in the Constitution's list of express powers, if laws are useful to the further express powers of Congress under the Constitution. So, in other words, the court said, because of the necessary and proper clause, because of that little paragraph in the Constitution, if the government has something that it's supposed to do, then obviously it can do other things to make sure those things happen. McCulloch has been described as, quote, the most important Supreme Court decision in American history, defining the scope of Congress's powers and delineating the relationship or spelling out the relationship between the federal government and the states. The case established two important principles in constitutional law. These two important principles are, first, the Constitution grants to Congress implied powers for implementing the Constitution's express powers to create a functional national government. In other words, the Constitution does give Congress obvious extra powers in order to complete their primary goals. Before the Supreme Court's decision in McCulloch, the scope, the full power of the U.S. government's authority was unclear. So, first off, the government can use implied powers. Secondly, states may not get in the way of the federal government correctly using its constitutional powers. So, if the government is correctly using its implied powers because it has expressed powers, then the states cannot mess with that. The federal government wins. Thank you very much, and I hope you're having a great time, and I hope you're learning.